She did not belong here, and everyone knew it. They saw the quiet set of her jaw, the age that had settled in faint lines around her eyes, and the way she moved with a deference that felt practiced, not earned. In the dust-choked chaos of forward operating base Nightingale, a place of loud machines and louder men, Specialist Anya Petrova was an anomaly. She was a mechanic assigned to the maintenance crew for the AH-77 Wraiths, the attack helicopters that were the base's angry gods. Her hands, though deft with a wrench, were seen as too small, her presence in the hangar a quiet interruption. The younger soldiers, boys with swagger and peach fuzz, worked around her with a careful sort of disregard. The senior NCOs, men whose authority was etched into their sun-beaten faces, gave her the simple tasks, the ones that required patience, but not, in their estimation, true insight. They mistook her silence for slowness, her methodical precision for uncertainty. They did not know what to make of the scars. Thin, silver lines crisscrossed the skin of her forearms, disappearing under the rolled-up sleeves of her fatigues. They were old wounds, long since healed, but they held a strange geometry, an unnatural pattern that drew the eye and then quickly repelled it. When Private Calloway, a boy barely 19 with a perpetual look of nervous awe, had once asked about them, she had simply looked down at her own skin as if noticing it for the first time. "Accidents happen," she'd said, her voice low and even, offering nothing more. The answer was a wall, and Calloway, like everyone else, learned not to push against it. He was perhaps the only one who saw something more in her. He watched how she cleaned her tools at the end of every shift, laying them out on a clean rag in perfect order, a ritual of quiet reverence. He saw the way she would sometimes stop and place a hand flat against the cold fuselage of Wraith 1, her head tilted as if listening to a secret language in the metal. The other saw a middle-aged woman lost in thought. Calloway saw a physician taking a pulse. The base commander, Colonel Vance, was a man who dealt in absolutes. Assets and liabilities, objectives met and objectives failed. Specialist Petrova was, to him, a name on a personnel roster, a logistical detail transferred in from some rear echelon depot to fill a slot. He had glanced at her file once. It was conspicuously thin, scrubbed of anything interesting. Service records like that usually meant one of two things: a career of profound mediocrity or something that had been intentionally erased. Given the woman he sometimes saw from his office window, walking across the tarmac with a steady, unhurried pace, he assumed the former. She lacked the sharp, hungry edge he saw in his best soldiers. She was background scenery. The pilots were worse. They were the new nobility, warriors of the modern age, who rode steeds of composite armor and steel. Lieutenant Graves, the lead pilot for Wraith 1, was the worst of them all. He was young, gifted, and possessed a brand of arrogance that only came from being told you were the best since the day you first pinned on your wings. He saw the maintenance crews as his personal pit crew, and Anya, in particular, was an invisible cog. He would stride into the hangar, peeling off his helmet, the scent of jet fuel and adrenaline clinging to him like a shroud, and bark out diagnostics without ever making eye contact with the woman who would spend the next 8 hours rectifying the issues. "She's pulling left on the climb out," he'd say to the air, to the crew chief, to anyone but her. And there's a vibration in the rotor wash above 80 knots. "Fix it." He never used the helicopter's call sign. To him, the machine was an extension of his own will, and he referred to it only as she. The trouble began subtly. It was a ghost in the machine, a flicker in the Wraith's complex nervous system that no one could isolate. Graves would report a momentary loss of power to the targeting pod, a phantom signal on the threat display. The other mechanics would run the standard diagnostics, poring over laptops and schematics, but the systems always came back clean. The bird would be cleared for flight, and a few days later, another ghost would appear. Frustration mounted. Wraith 1 was the most advanced gunship on the base, a vital asset for the increasingly dangerous patrols in the valley beyond the wire. Grounding it was not an option, but flying with an intermittent, untraceable fault was a gamble Vance was unwilling to take. The crew chief, Sergeant Major Evans, a man whose patience had been worn thin by decades of sand and stress, was feeling the pressure from the colonel. He put his best teams on it, a group of sharp, cocky specialists who spoke in acronyms and technical jargon. They swarmed the aircraft, swapping out modules, running miles of new cabling, their confidence slowly eroding with each failed test flight. Anya watched from a distance. She performed her assigned tasks, refueling, rearming, checking fluid levels, with her usual quiet diligence. But her eyes were always on Wraith 1. She saw the way the other mechanics treated the machine as a collection of parts, a problem to be solved through logic and procedure. They did not listen to it. In the late hours, after the others had left in disgust, she would walk the length of the hangar to where the gunship sat in silence. She would run her hands over the access panels, her fingers tracing the seams in the armor plating. She felt the subtle resonance of the airframe, the memory of stress held within the metal. She knew this machine, not from the manuals, but from a deeper, more intimate understanding of how things of violence live and breathe. One evening, as she was checking the hydraulic lines near the tail boom, she found it. A tiny, almost invisible chafe mark on a wire bundle, tucked deep inside a compartment where maintenance schedules rarely required inspection. It was abraded, the protective sheath worn down to the barest filament, but only where the wire pressed against a bracing strut during high-G maneuvers. On the ground, it made perfect contact. In the air, under stress, it would ground itself for a fraction of a second, just long enough to throw a ghost onto the screens before reconnecting. It was a one-in-a-million fault, the kind of thing that drives engineers to madness. She went to find Sergeant Major Evans. He was in his makeshift office, nursing a cup of coffee that looked as bitter as his mood. "Sarge," she said, her voice barely rising above the hum of the hangar lights. He looked up, his eyes weary. "What is it, Petrova?" "I think I found the problem with Wraith 1. She explained her discovery, her words simple and direct. She spoke of the abrasion, the position, the logic of how it would only manifest under specific aerodynamic stress. Evans listened, his expression shifting from exhaustion to disbelief, and then to dismissal. "A chafed wire?" he said, a cynical laugh escaping his lips. "Petrova, we've had 3 teams of factory-certified techs crawling over that bird for 2 weeks. They've swapped out half the avionics bay. You think they missed a chafed wire?" "It's in a blind spot," she said, her gaze unwavering. "You can only see it if you're looking for it specifically, and you just happen to find it while checking the hydraulics?" He shook his head, waving a hand dismissively. "We're running a full spectrum analysis on the power distribution bus tomorrow. We'll follow procedure. Thanks for the input, specialist." He turned back to his paperwork, the conversation over. Anya stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between them. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply nodded once, a gesture so small it was barely perceptible, and walked away. She had presented the truth. It was not her responsibility to force him to see it. The weight of his disbelief was his to carry, not hers. She went back to her work, the knowledge of the flaw a cold, hard certainty in her mind. The ghost would remain until someone was willing to listen. The next day, the crisis broke. It came not as a gradual escalation, but as a sudden, violent crack in the fragile stability of the region. A long-range reconnaissance patrol, call sign Nomad, was ambushed in a narrow canyon deep in contested territory. The first frantic calls for support painted a grim picture. Multiple casualties, pinned down by heavy machine gun fire from fortified positions on the canyon rim, their exit cut off. They were being systematically dismantled. Every available air asset was scrambled. But a sudden dust storm had rolled in, grounding the jets. The other Wraiths were already engaged on a separate, high-priority mission miles away. The only gunship on the ground, fueled and armed, was Wraith 1. In the command tent, the air crackled with tension. Colonel Vance stood over the tactical map, his face a mask of stone. "I need that bird in the air," he said, his voice a low growl directed at Sergeant Major Evans over the comms. "Nomad is taking a beating. They won't last another 30 minutes, sir," were still showing intermittent power fluctuations. Evans's voice crackled back, strained with panic. The diagnostics are still running. We can't clear it for flight. I don't care about your diagnostics, Sergeant Major. Vance roared, his composure finally breaking. I care about the men bleeding out in that canyon. Get it flying. In the hangar, chaos reigned. Evans was yelling orders, and his best techs were running frantic, useless checks, their procedures rendered meaningless by the urgency of the situation. Lieutenant Graves was already in the cockpit of Wraith 1, going through his pre-flight checks, his voice tight with rage over the radio. If this thing can spin up, I'm taking it, he spat. To hell with the red tags. Anya was securing an ammo belt on another aircraft when the full weight of the situation descended. She heard the desperation in the radio calls, the fear in the voices of the men in the canyon. She saw the panicked, fruitless activity around Wraith 1. In that moment, something shifted inside her. The quiet deference fell away, burned off by the heat of necessity. The disciplined silence she had cultivated for years was replaced by a cold, absolute purpose. She dropped the ammo belt, the clatter of metal on concrete loud in the sudden pocket of silence around her. She walked toward Wraith 1. She did not run. Her pace was deliberate, measured, an island of calm in the swirling storm of panic. Men half her age and twice her size moved out of her way, their frantic energy faltering in the face of her unnerving serenity. Clear out, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the noise with the authority of a rifle shot. The techs, startled, stopped what they were doing and looked at her. Sergeant Major Evans turned, his face red with exertion and fury. Petrova, what in God's name do you think you're doing? Get back to your station. She ignored him. Her eyes were fixed on the gunship. She pointed at Private Calloway, who was standing frozen near the nose of the aircraft. Calloway, give me a T-handle driver, a splice kit, and 10 centimeters of insulation wrap. Now Calloway, jolted by the command, stared at her for a beat, then at the sputtering Sergeant Major. He saw the look in Anya's eyes, a look of profound, unshakable competence, and made his choice. He sprinted toward the tool cribs. Petrova, I am ordering you to stand down, Evans shouted, taking a step toward her. Anya turned her head slowly to face him. The look she gave him was utterly devoid of fear or subordination. It was the look of a predator assessing a non-threat. You want this bird in the air, Sergeant Major? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Then stay out of my way. Evans froze, the words dying in his throat. He saw something in her that he had never seen before, a lifetime of violence held in perfect, disciplined check. He was looking at a soldier, a real one, and he suddenly felt like a boy playing with toys. Anya turned her back on him and moved to the tail boom of the Wraith. She didn't need a ladder. With an economy of motion that was almost beautiful, she placed a hand on the fuselage, found a foothold, and hoisted herself up. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent more time on the skin of an aircraft than on solid ground. She pried open the access panel with her bare fingers, the metal groaning in protest. Graves' voice crackled from the cockpit speakers mounted on the hangar wall. What's going on out there? Who is that on my aircraft? Anya ignored him. Calloway arrived, breathless, holding out the tools she had requested. Here, ma'am, he said, the word ma'am coming out instinctively. She took them without looking at him, her entire focus on the nest of wires inside the compartment. Her hands moved with a surgeon's precision. There was no wasted movement, no hesitation. She located the frayed wire, her fingers knowing exactly where to go in the dark, cramped space. With the driver, she loosened the bracing strut just enough to give herself room. She clipped the damaged section, stripped the ends, and applied the splice, her movements economical and swift. While she worked, the sleeve of her uniform, already rolled up, slipped higher on her forearm. It exposed the full tapestry of her scars, the silver lines stark against her skin under the harsh hangar lights. And it exposed something else, something that was normally hidden beneath the cuff. Woven into the scarred tissue, just below her wrist, was a small, subtle tattoo. It was a stylized rendering of a ghost, its edges blurred as if it were dissipating into smoke. It was a symbol few would ever recognize, but it was not meant for most people. At that exact moment, a man in sterile fatigues, a special operations liaison who had been monitoring the crisis from the command tent, ran into the hangar to get a direct report. His eyes scanned the chaotic scene and landed on Anya, perched on the tail of the Wraith. He saw her arm. He saw the tattoo. The blood drained from his face. His stride faltered, and he stopped dead, his mouth slightly agape. A name, a legend whispered only in the most classified briefings and in the hushed conversations of Tier 1 operators, escaped his lips. Ghost, he breathed, the name swallowed by the hangar's noise but heard by the colonel's aide standing next to him. Anya finished the splice and wrapped it securely. She slapped the access panel shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. She slid off the tail boom, landing silently on the concrete. She looked up toward the cockpit. "Light it up, Lieutenant," she said, her voice calm and clear. "You're clean." In the cockpit, Graves was stunned into silence. He had watched the entire event on one of the external cameras, watched this quiet mechanic override his crew chief and perform surgery on his multi-million-dollar gunship. He hesitated for a second, his training screaming at him not to trust an unauthorized repair. But the call for help from Nomad was still echoing in his headset. He took a breath and engaged the engine startup sequence. The turbine spooled up with a clean, rising whine. The vibration he had reported was gone. The dashboard was a sea of green lights. The ghost was gone. He looked down from the cockpit and saw the woman walking away, her shoulders straight, her job done. He didn't know her name. He didn't know anything about her. But he knew she had just saved his life and the lives of the men in the canyon. As Wraith 1 lifted off, its rotor washed blasting dust and debris across the tarmac. Sergeant Major Evans stood motionless, watching it go. The SOF liaison walked over to him, his eyes still fixed on Anya as she retrieved her tools. "You know who that is, Sergeant Major?" the liaison asked, his voice low and reverent. Evans shook his head, unable to speak. "That's Anya Petrova," the liaison said, though he used her name as a formality. "We knew her as Ghost. She was a legend in the program, the kind of operator they build myths around, the kind they have to bury in the system when she's done, just to keep her safe." He paused, his gaze drifting to her scarred forearms. "Those marks on her arm, they're not from accidents. It was a private thing for her, a way of accounting. Each one represent a life she took to save one of ours. The official count is classified above your pay grade and mine, but the rumors always said it was well over 100-inch." Evans stared, his mind struggling to reconcile the image of the quiet, disregarded mechanic with a lethal phantom the liaison described. The woman who he had dismissed, who he had treated as an incompetent subordinate, was a warrior of a caliber he had never encountered in his entire career. Colonel Vance had heard the liaison's hushed report through his aide. The name Ghost had landed in the command tent like a thunderclap, recontextualizing everything. He had pulled up Petrova's file again, this time seeing the sparse details not as a sign of mediocrity, but as a heavily redacted monument to a career of impossible lethality. He now understood that she had not been sent to his base to fill a slot. She had been sent here to be hidden, to be forgotten, to find a measure of peace in the quiet rhythm of maintenance and repair. He had put a living legend to work sweeping floors. The thought shamed him more than any battlefield defeat ever could. Wraith 1 returned 2 hours later, its ordnance spent, its nose smeared with the grime of combat. The Nomad patrol had been extracted, every last one of them. Graves had performed with clinical ferocity, the gunship responding to his every command as if it were a part of him. When he landed, he didn't immediately head for debrief. He shut down the aircraft, the whine of the turbines slowly dying, and climbed out of the cockpit. He walked across the tarmac, his flight suit still smelling of cordite, and entered the hangar. Anya was there, wiping grease from a power conduit. She looked up as he approached, her expression as placid as ever. Graves stopped a few feet from her. He, the cocky, untouchable pilot, was at a complete loss for words. The arrogance had been sandblasted out of him somewhere over that canyon. He looked at her, at the quiet strength in her eyes, at the faint scars on her arms. He saw not a mechanic, but a guardian. He started, but the words failed him. He wanted to thank her, to apologize for his dismissiveness, to ask her 100 questions he knew he had no right to ask. Instead, he just stood there, his helmet under his arm, his head bowed slightly in a gesture of profound, unstated respect. He gave a single, sharp nod. Anya met his gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod in return. It was an acknowledgement and acceptance. Nothing more needed to be said between them. He turned and walked away, a changed man. Later, Colonel Vance came down to the hangar. It was an unprecedented visit. The base commander did not make house calls to the maintenance bay. He found Anya alone, meticulously cleaning her tools, the ritual that Calloway had once admired. Vance walked up to her, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. "Specialist Petrova," he said. His voice was formal, but lacked its usual commanding edge. It was freighted with a new humility. Anya looked up, her hand still. "Colonel, your transfer orders came through this morning," he said, holding out a data slate. "A quiet post in Germany. Non deployable." The request was apparently put in months ago. "It seems your time here was always meant to be temporary." Anya looked at the slate, but made no move to take it. She knew what it was. An exit, a way back to the anonymity she had earned. "Thank you, sir," she said. Vance hesitated. "The official report for today's action will state that the fault in Wraith 1 was discovered and repaired by the maintenance team under the direction of Sergeant Major Evans. It will be a commendation for the whole section." He was giving her a choice, an opportunity to reclaim her anonymity, to let the legend of Ghost fade back into the shadows. "That sounds right, sir," she said, her expression unchanging. She understood the unspoken contract. Her peace was worth more than any medal. He nodded, satisfied and relieved. "What you did today, Anya, thank you." He used her first name, a bridge across the vast gulf of rank and secrecy. He then turned and left her alone with the quiet hum of the machinery. The last person to approach her that night was Private Calloway. He came not with questions or awestruck praise. He simply walked over to the workbench next to hers, picked up a clean rag, and began wiping down a set of wrenches, mirroring her actions. He worked in silence, a comfortable, respectful quiet settling between them. It was a simple act of solidarity, an acknowledgement that he saw her, not the legend, but the person, the professional. Anya watched him for a moment. Then a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips. She finished cleaning her last tool and laid it in its proper place. She looked around the hangar, at the hulking, silent shapes of the gunships she had cared for. She placed her palm flat against the cool skin of Wraith 1, feeling the faint, residual energy of its flight. The machine felt steady. It felt whole. She took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of oil and ozone, the scent of her quiet sanctuary. Her hands were clean, but for the grease deep in the lines of her palms and the faint, silver scars that held the story of a life she was finally allowed to leave behind. She walked out of the hangar and into the cool desert night, leaving nothing behind but the echo of a ghost and the weight of an earned and silent respect.